And hello, welcome everybody to the August edition of Dinner with the Devs. We're doing it a little bit early this month because of our engagements with Gamescom and PAX West, but we're thrilled to be here. And we're thrilled for you to join us for the August Dinner with the Devs. We're talking about Playtesting 101, how to structure a playtest, how to interact with the player with the playtest, evaluating the playtest afterwards, and everything in between. So if you are a budding game designer, a budding game developer, if you're just interested in doing a playtest and what's involved in that, or again just associated with the games industry and what exactly goes on with playtesting, we are looking forward to entertaining any and all of those questions. So Dwayne here from the marketing team. It is a pleasure to be with you all tonight. And if you have any questions, please make sure you put it in the YouTube live chat, or if you are watching it alongside your Discord channels on the I Expect You to Die Until You Fall or the Among Us VR Discord, please make sure that you put your questions in the respective Dinner with the Devs channel, and our live chat moderator, Kuda Kuma, or Adam, as you may also know him, will be able to get your question to us. So we have a lovely panel here representing our product team and design team within the studio. And as always, I start with a question for them to think about, for them to ruminate in the hour that we are talking about Playtesting 101, and then I get with them at the very end. So the question for them to think about is, what continues to excite you about playtesting? Thankfully, at Schell Games, we do a little bit of everything. So maybe it's the variety, maybe it's something else. So I will wait with all of you to see what their answers are. So with that being said, let's first introduce our panel here, and let's start with one of our newest members to the studio, Fiona.
Hi, my name's Fiona. I'm the playtest coordinator here at Schell Games, and I'm on the product team. But I'm super excited to be here. Looking forward to spending the next hour with you guys.
All right, go ahead, Alexis.
Hello, my name is Alexis Miller. I'm Director of Product Management, so super involved with playtesting as well as doing other sorts of research to find out what do our players want. So excited to be here as well.
Hi, and my name is Ryan Hall. I am a designer at Schell. So I deal with playtesting. I enjoy the benefits of playtesting from my side in development, and I've also done a fair amount in my day. For a long time, we did not have a playtest coordinator, so we're very happy to have Fiona. So, yeah, very excited to talk playtesting. A lot to it.
Good stuff. So before we really dive into it, I always like to give the audience just a little bit of your backgrounds of how you got into the industry or how you got into Schell Games. So Ryan, you just finished talking, and I think you might be the longest tenure one out of all of us. I think maybe you and I are about 6-7 months apart of getting to the studio. But please, how did you get into the industry in Schell Games?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm working on my 9th year at Schell, and it's been a blast. I actually went to school. I'm young enough to have been around when the degrees were first starting to appear at different schools. So I studied at University of Baltimore. I later went to the Entertainment Technology Center at Carnegie Mellon, and from there began interning at Schell. Eventually got a full-time offer. So I took the newer, more sort of academic route into the industry. Always knew that I wanted to be a designer from an early time. Little bit of art talent, not a lot of code talent. Kind of found it out from there. So
Good stuff. What about you, Fiona? How'd you get started?
Yeah, so I actually just recently graduated in December, but I have a kind of mixed background. I studied neuroscience and game user research and archaeology, and then ended up doing a master's that was like specialized, not specialized in playtesting, but it was like an emphasis in user research. So yeah, when I was just applying for places, Schell games really stood out. Thought it was a good fit. So excited to be here. But yeah. Oh, and also this is my first year at Schell. So yeah.
Good stuff.
Nice.
And Alexis, yeah.
So my background is completely different from Ryan and Fiona's. I have been a Schell for 3 years now, which has been fantastic. And before that, I actually worked in the healthcare technology space. So I worked on things like if you are going to see your doctor and you want to schedule an appointment through a mobile app, like what's that experience like? I also worked on a couple other mobile apps prior to that that were health insurance related. And that's actually where I got introduced to Schell Games because we worked with them as a client and we made this really cool app. Ryan and I actually got to work together on that. We made this really cool app that was helping people quit smoking, stress management, those sorts of topics, but in a really beautiful game aspect. So there were mini games that were in it. There was a chatbot. It was a really great experience. So through that time, is I really love working with Schell Games. So it's like, maybe I should work for Schell Games instead of with them in that role. So my background from an educational standpoint, I was a journalist as an undergrad. That was one of my majors, and so to me, I feel like that connects a lot to playtesting because with journalism, it's all about the curiosity of understanding people's experiences and wanting to really have that conversation, right, and learn, sort of become an expert in whatever it is that you're like writing an article about. So, so for me, that sort of is a thread that connects to playtesting, but I had a lot of totally unrelated jobs prior to this, including teaching English in Japan. So you can come here from all different directions.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So thank you all. And you guys have heard my background dozens of times. So go back to a previous dinner with the devs to figure out where I came from. Okay, so what interests you guys about playtesting? I guess I'd love to start with Fiona from being the studio's first, I think, playtest coordinator. Why was that something that piqued your interest?
Yeah, I think just playtesting in general kind of combines a lot of different things that I enjoy. So like my background, I said, was in neuroscience, but also in game user research. So understanding like how people think about things and what do they enjoy and why. And I think playtesting covers a lot of that. And I think just also it's fun because you get to collaborate with a lot of different people. It kind of gets you interested in all the different parts of game design because people give feedback on everything. And you can also test anything. So everybody has different questions. So I think that's why I like playtesting the most. You get to work with a lot of different people. And also it's just, I find it interesting what makes people tick. So.
Very cool. Yeah, I forgot that you had that neuroscience slant too. So that's pretty cool. For you, Ryan, I guess as a designer, what exactly on a design standpoint, what parts about playtesting really interests you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, playtesting is paramount, so much so that one of our studio pillars is playtest, playtest, playtest. It's the only way to know, right? You could have the coolest idea. You could be convinced that your game is airtight. It's great. Just ship it. But all that doesn't matter. None of that matters in the face of actual players, actual reactions to your game, right? Like, so we as a studio have always tried to playtest as much as humanly possible. And there's no such thing. We truly believe there's no such thing as too much playtesting. Sure, if you're really doing it so much so that development grinds to a halt and people that need to be working on the game don't have time to, it's conceivable that you could playtest too much. But in practice, we never really get enough. So that's why we've brought in Fiona. That's why we work as hard as we can to make it easier to playtest. Because yeah, like it's also a big wake-up call for your ego as a developer. You really need to get at peace with hearing feedback, receiving feedback, and then importantly, seeking feedback at every turn. Hey, check this out. Hey, I just did this. Wonder what you think about it. Um, Everything from an informal playtest like that to a giant beta for your game to get a wide range of data is all playtesting, and it's all super important.
Good stuff. We're going to talk about data in some detail later on this stream. So please, folks, stay tuned if you're interested in how we interpret that. And for you, Alexis, I know whenever you're talking about your time with making a mobile app with the company that you were previously with, and how exactly do you do that? There had to have been some aspects of play testing that made you at least kind of intrigued with that process. So what else interests you about play testing?
Yeah, I think there's always surprises, and I think those are the like golden nuggets of playtesting, right? Having things that as a team, people feel really confident about, and then seeing it out in the wild. It's great because it's better to know this information and learn these surprises while you're developing than to release the game and then find out, in reviews or because people are returning your game, right? So, that's it's such a gift to have that insight while you still have time to make those changes. So yeah, there's just always nice surprises, whether they seem nice at first or not.
Yeah, and Alexis brought up some good points about the perspectives of playtesting according to the studio or the disciplines within it. We're going to talk a little bit about that in some detail later on too. So before we start diving in deeper, though, I always like to make sure that all of us and everybody watching is on the same playing field. So, according to you or your either your opinions or how you interpret the studio's opinion, how would you define playtesting? And I'll open this up to whoever want to go first, and from here on out, feel free to to jump in on others opinions or statements. So, who would like to open it up?
I can take a swing. It's definitely a big question. I'm going to try to be as broad as I can because it is a broad field. Like I would say, if someone that is not on the dev team is playing your game, or even just a part of your game, or experiencing words or art from your game, you are conducting playtesting at some level. You are bringing your game to people that have not made it and getting outside opinions about not just the game as a whole. I think this is an important thing that hopefully we'll get into later, but even just aspects of it, right? Like, here is the platform that it could be on. What are your opinions on that? Here are some of the art concepts that we're working with. Here are some titles we may even want to play test. That constitutes playtesting as well. So seeking opinions on your work. Maybe it's the most broad that I could be.
I think that's a good description. I think the best quality playtesting is naive feedback, right? So people who have never played your game before, and you're really getting that authentic experience and getting to learn about their experience and their opinions.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was already said. And also, I think I think my favorite kind of feedback comes from people in the target audience. So when you can really get specific, like when you screen for people and you ask people to play test, making sure that they are somebody who like maybe would buy the game or maybe would play the game with their friend. I think that's really useful feedback to get. Yeah, so anything where, like Ryan said, anything you can give feedback on anything from any part of the process, whether it's like conceptual or an actual build of the game. So yeah.
Good stuff. And you guys, the questions are pouring in, so thank you so much. I see questions from Fear, Tongue Surgery, Salsa Muir. We're gonna get in Seagull. We're gonna get to your questions. Brayson and Cameron show. Thank you for tuning back in. Paradise Decay. It's always good to see you. So thank you for tuning in as well. So we're gonna get to your questions and your comments. So thank you for sticking with us. So as we defined what playtesting is, of just discovering what naive feedback from the target audience, from different parts of the game, might not be the game itself, could be pricing, could be the title of the game, just like you guys mentioned. What are some common misconceptions about playtesting that you've run into?
I've got one for that. Is I think something that sometimes comes up is people are like, "Oh, I don't want to show this yet because it's not finished." And that's actually like the best time to show it to someone is when something isn't finished because you still have time to change it. So yeah, I would say that might be a common misconception that comes up is like, "Oh, you have to have a finished like final game and everything's all finished." And yeah, you can test it anytime. So
Yeah, that's a good one. I think this doesn't happen to us very often, but sometimes people who are playtesting will think like, oh, like I need to give like all positive feedback, right? Like that's what they want to hear. They want to hear about what's good. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, like they might think, oh, they only want to hear negative feedback, right? And really, like we want to hear everything. We want to hear the full spectrum. And like a lot of times we'll ask people to do a technique where you're thinking out loud, and that I think can be extremely valuable for us, even more so necessarily than someone saying this is great. Because when you're thinking out loud, we're learning things like, you're in a puzzle and you're looking around the space in VR and you're saying out loud, I was expecting that there would be a, gun here that I could use to solve the puzzle, but I don't see one. And then we're like, oh my gosh, like that's such a cool idea. Like we should put a gun there. So, so I think the misconceptions can be like thinking that what the developers want to hear, but like often just being your authentic self is the most useful information.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could totally agree on that. I try my best if I'm part of a playtest to put people at ease and let them know that you're not going to hurt anyone's feelings, and you're not being graded. Please just let us know all the things that you think. And I think another misconception is that as well, right? That thinking that it's just as simple as putting your game or your creative endeavor in front of someone else. And now I'm playtesting. Okay, whatever they say, I'll just, I don't know, maybe change what they don't like. There's a lot more to it than that, right? Like you need to, the way I see it, it's this fine balance between helping the player give you information that the playtester give you information that you can use while not dictating what information they give you, right? You, as Alexis said, you want to hear their unvarnished opinions, but you also want to help guide them to the places and things that will be the most useful to learn about, right? So it's this interesting balance between just enough structure and not so much rigid structure that you're limiting or changing the amount and the quality of the feedback that you receive. So I think there's a misconception about how easy it may be to conduct a substantive playtest.
just to just to oh, sorry, go ahead, Dwayne.
Oh, it's all you.
I was going to say, to add on to what Ryan just said, something like a technique that people will use sometimes to eliminate biases. They'll say, even if you are working on a project, you might say like, oh, I'm a third party person, or like, you're not going to hurt my feelings, or making sure that when playtesters are playtesting, they know that you're like separate and you're able to receive that honest feedback. Just giving them reassurance that like, hey, we want to know exactly what you're thinking, and like, don't worry about offending anybody, because the best kind of feedback is just honest feedback. So
Good stuff. Yeah, thank you all. Yeah, we're off and running. We have a couple of questions or a couple of comments. Some people like the shirt. Thank you. It is Ike Shoshi that I related. So that's something that the studio got that we were anxious to give out to to our team players. But let's see, we have something from Fear. Fear asks, is there anything particularly hard or frustrating about playtesting? So feel free, whoever would like to get that started.
I could throw out something from the development side. I think
Yeah.
one of the most frustrating things is making sure the build of the game is prepared for a playtest, making sure that you have the changes included that you want to learn more about, and then sometimes it just doesn't happen, right? Again, we say you want to playtest early, you want to playtest frequently. Well, that means that you're going to be at different stages of development, and the volatility of a in development build can often lead to some missed opportunities or just some frustration when it comes to how often you can put something into a playtest. So that doesn't really have much to do with like the feedback cycle or working with a playtester directly, but that can be frustrating as a developer.
I know one thing I've experienced in past roles, I think we're better at this at Schell Games, but no one's perfect, is the timing of getting playtest feedback. I definitely had experiences in the past where you would spend all this time planning the playtesting, coming up with the questions, putting the research out there, summarizing the feedback, and then the development team's like, well, we don't have time to make these changes. So again, that hasn't happened so much at Schell as in some of my prior experiences with development, but that can be super frustrating. So timing is important.
Timing is very important. Fiona, were you going to jump in?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say one thing about it's kind of related, I guess, to what Ryan was saying about the build, but just in general, like tech issues, but like you have to be prepared to just deal with anything. Like people come with all sorts of things, and especially over Zoom and stuff, or Google Meet, wherever you're testing, if it's remote, especially, people have trouble with like just little things with software, like how do I share my screen and stuff like that. So knowing not just how the game is going to work, but also how you can help facilitate like a play test with all of the other kinds of software that are running is something that can be difficult that comes up. So, yeah.
Yeah, I never thought I would be such an IT troubleshooter, but inevitably I've learned that skill.
Yeah. You want to try your best to put all the frustration on yourself as a playtester or as a developer and make the process as smooth as possible for your playtesters who we're always so gracious for. So
Yeah.
I think that's an important part of it too. Like there should not be a frustration vector with the actual act of playtesting or with the feedback that you're getting. Of course, unless someone is like completely acting unreasonably, but yeah, you want to keep your calm and keep your cool. And again, like we've said already tonight, hear their opinion, even if it's something you might disagree with, or that you can't figure out a solution for on the spot. You just want to, or if you something you've heard before. There's always like, yeah, we hear about that all the time. It's like just let them give their honest opinion, So don't allow frustration to enter into the sort of playtest conductor relationship if you can help it.
Yeah, one thing I realized we didn't talk about explicitly, but that is useful to bring up now maybe, is that in the past, Schell Games did in-person playtesting where people would come to our studio and we'd give them a VR headset and they would play the game. And now we've really shifted to doing almost all of our playtesting remotely. And so that has definitely had different impacts on, the frustrations and things like that, because some of the benefits of the in-person playtest were, we could take some of that hurdle away in terms of the IT setup and all of that, because it was like our equipment, it was our office, right? But on the flip side, I think we gain a lot by testing with people in their own homes because they're using their own equipment and they're in their comfortable environment. So it's definitely changed a lot in terms of the the setup and the diversity of players that we get, and finding, like Fiona was talking about, finding that target audience is a lot easier when we're not restricted to people that like VR in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to that question or to that comment, Alexis, and I'll stay with you. There was another question that said, if I can find it. Oh yeah, do you ever playtest certain demographics, or is it just general playtesting all the time? And so, to your point, I'd like to look at in person and remote playtesting, because just like you said, and we were getting to that there was quite the shift in 2020 with a pandemic and everything, that Schell Games really had to reconsider how playtesting was done. And Alexis here was one of the main proponents and one of the main players of getting the studio ready, equipped, and successful at doing remote playtesting. So if you can talk a little bit about that first part about getting certain demographics in person versus remote, and then on a more wider level, like you mentioned, but we can go a little bit deeper, of making that shift to remote playtesting. And there are a couple articles too that Alexis is a part of. The Oculus one that I think I sent the link to you, Adam. If I didn't, I'll try to get it while Alexis is answering this question so people can get more information. So go for it, Alexis.
Yeah. So when we were playtesting in the office, I think we were more concerned about just getting warm bodies in the door than we were about certain demographics. And sometimes that was a little bit challenging, because it meant that people who were coming in were, they may be interested in VR, but they weren't necessarily our target audience because they didn't have a VR headset and they weren't super comfortable in headset in general. And so I think there was some noise in that feedback, because it's a little bit harder to separate, oh, is this person struggling because our game is too difficult, or are they just like so new and naive to being in a VR headset and controllers that they're learning that. So, we started using an online platform called usertesting.com, and that just opened up the possibilities to be able to focus on specific demographics or specific characteristics. So things like, oh, we want to test with players who have a Quest, who are into action games, or even more specific, right? We want to test with people who have purchased, I Expect You to Die 1, because we want them to play test I Expect You to Die 2. So because we had a pool to literally over 2 million people through that online platform, like we were able to get really specific people. And so I think that's been tremendous for all of our playtesting efforts. And, has even allowed us to do testing with players with disabilities too. And test with things like color blindness, test with players who use wheelchairs, players who are playing with one hand. So to me, like that was the biggest win for moving to remote play testing, is just having access to so many more people who were our target audience and could help us out with like really specific problems and really specific questions.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So we have a couple more questions all around this, so we're just going to work with the questions here. Let's see. Yeah, so where was it? So Saltsalmur said, to your point, are there any special considerations when playtesting for accessibility in VR compared to flat screen games? I think Fiona, you guys can both give some comments on this question.
Yeah. So we have another dinner with the devs that is all about accessibility. So it's certainly a big topic, I will say that the answer is yes. There are definitely differences for VR. I think some of the big ones I mentioned, when you're in VR, if you're in a wheelchair, for example, your ability to reach and stretch and interact within that virtual world is very different. So that's something that we've been conscious of and have tried to make most of our games friendly to folks that are seated. I think also just the reaching and stretching can be something that, maybe you aren't necessarily in a wheelchair, but just certain mobility considerations where it's hard to reach down and pick something up off the floor in the virtual world, or to the physical extent, like maybe it's too physical for you. So like Until You Fall is an interesting example where we have difficulty settings, and so that isn't necessarily an accessibility thing, but it also helps people that might have different accessibility needs. So we actually, with all of our projects, we use a tool called the Accessibility Matrix, and it is designed to be used for any kind of game, not just VR. But because our studio creates so many VR experiences, over the past 3 years that we've been using this matrix, like we really, I'd say, built up good examples of how we can accomplish a lot of accessibility goals in VR. And Fiona has done a lot of great testing recently about trying to make sure that we're meeting accessibility needs. So great. It'd be great if you could talk about that, Fiona.
Sure. Yeah, I think something, I mean, this is kind of, it's a collaboration too with like Alexis and some of the other devs. But something that we've been testing recently is like VR sickness and motion sickness in different games, trying to help mitigate those symptoms and like what are those symptoms and what's causing them. And like something that just comes up is it's so overwhelming to be just in the headset and like everything's around you and the motion is totally different. It's different from looking at a screen versus like having it in the headset. And so, yeah, because there's like no clear answer for or like no clear solution for like how do you fix it for everybody. And so that's something that we've kind of been dealing with recently and just working through and coming up with new solutions and testing it out. So that's been pretty interesting. And then like something else that we did for a game was we wanted to see like how does this experience differ from right hand versus left hand, and yeah, there's all sorts of things that you can play test with that. But yeah, doing a lot of really fun accessibility testing lately. So it's been good.
I know whenever the I Expect You Die 2 team was trying to finish up one of the missions, it's escaping me. Whenever you're going into the fabricator's warehouse and you have to use the cinch to go down, because I'm a left-handed player, or I'm left-handed dominant. They wanted me to go in a couple of times as a left-hander to see how comfortable I was within that scene. So Fiona, to your point, just trying to look at all the different things that can either frustrate or delight the player is very interesting.
We have folks at the studio that aren't just left-handed, but some that are afraid of heights. The window washing level of I Expect You to Die 1 comes to mind, as well as something that we put folks through. Now, these folks at Schell that were other developers and knew what they were getting into. We didn't surprise anyone, but yeah, again, playtesting is the only way to be sure, right? You can actually have the best intentions regarding accessibility. You could be a forward thinker and an ally in terms of letting the most people play your game, but there's no substitute for actually talking to people that need different features, that need different ways for the game to behave. It's so eye-opening. I've only been a part of a couple of accessibility targeted playtests, but like any assumptions that I had, and I tried to go in with very few, were just broken apart by like what mattered to them, what they were seeing that I was never seeing. So especially from the development side, I mean, we pride ourselves at Schell trying to include as many people as we can when we make our games. and still like you can learn so much from the playtesting process.
Ryan, that makes me think about the fact that we had we've been doing a lot of playtesting recently, as Fiona mentioned, about motion sickness. And that I think is one of the things that's really hard to use our developers as proxies for, right? Like Dwayne's experience as a left-handed person, I think is valuable. But like what's hard is people don't realize, but when you're doing VR development and you're in headset all the time, like your body does get used to that experience. And so when we're worried about players getting sick in the game, like we're not good indicators of if something's going to make people sick or not. So
Not at all.
Fiona's been doing a lot of tests where we actually are screening for people who identify as likely to get sick in VR, and we tell them up front, like, this is what this test is about. So we're not trying to force people to puke. But I think it's been really powerful to be able to do that kind of testing, especially with, naive people that are not developers.
There you go. I have a comment here I want to bring up that could be interesting to talk about. Once I participated in a beta with a beta version we played was completely different by the full release. I was a bit brokenhearted by that. So many features that everybody loved, all gone. But I don't think it's Schell Games. We had something like that before. Well, okay. Well, we kind of have, but but it's whenever like. I guess Ryan, from a design standpoint and being on a project team, how does that feel? Because one thing I'm kind of thinking about was how Superchem became HoloLab champions, and I don't know. I don't think you were on that team.
I was not, but I'm somewhat familiar with the development there, and other examples too. I mean, so it's funny. This gets said a lot, like on dev teams, especially as designers. We if we need to cut something, we usually say, the players don't know what they never got, right? Like, it makes it easier to cut all your cool ideas. But yeah, like if you're going with a wide beta, a very wide beta, most of Schell's testing is small scale. So you have a handful of people that play the game, maybe 10 or 12, and you're hoping to reach thousands or tens of thousands. And you haven't really let these people down in any way by changing the game too much, nor will like the secrets get out of like the game that people could have played. But if you're doing a large beta, it's a huge consideration. You're taking a really big step. You are putting out there a lot of information about the game. And yeah, ultimately you run the risk of people being very familiar with what they didn't get, which is counter to what I just said. So it's not something to be done lightly, but it's still tremendously important. Yes. When you reach the beta stage, typically you're probably trying to test, numbers, right? You want data about balancing a game. You might want to slam your servers if you're doing a multiplayer game. You're going large scale for a reason. Because oftentimes if you want qualitative feedback, it doesn't take too many people scientifically to begin to build some consensus around something to change or something that is a problem in a level, for example. So for a beta on a game to completely like take off its mask and reveal itself as a different game, I mean, maybe somewhat of an anomaly. And yeah, I can't speak to that too much in Schell's case, but I mean, ultimately, sometimes when you do a playtest, you could find that just things aren't working, right? Like Dwayne, you had mentioned Superchem, like you're going down one path, and to keep going down that path or to fix some of the issues that a playtest is revealing to you, you might just not have the resources or the time, or it might just be a different direction than you're able to head. So for whatever reason, playtest results can be an impetus for major change to a game. The likes of which is described by our commenter. So yeah, it's crazy. And again, that's something you have to try to prepare yourself for. Like I would say the Superchem team, from what I remember of that sort of project, like really, really did well, gracefully sort of turning the page on some of those ideas and even the structure of that game to then rebound and strongly create this awesome game that we have now. So yeah, it can be crazy.
Yeah, and to that point, that was also a very interesting project, right? Because that was through funding from the Department of Education through the Institute of Education Sciences and the Small Business Innovation Research. And Superchem was phase one of like, can this be done? And it was about teaching science in high school in a virtual reality environment. And then phase two was like, okay, we'll make it reality. And then just to your point, like it wasn't a large beta, but the team went to a bunch of science teachers. Like, is this something that you would want, a narrative VR science thing in VR? And they were like, no, we need something that deals with lab practice. So we're like, oh, okay. And so they, just like you said, it was a pivot that was done super gracefully, and they came out with HoloLab Champions, which is absolutely one of my favorite games to show. And so it's an absolute blast. But to your point, it cannot be done lightly, and it was done through playtesting, right? Yep. So
the playtesting, like, you know, confirmed what people, I think internally were still debating, right? Like, is this viable? And then you ask the teachers, you ask the users. In this case, the teachers would be proctoring the experience, and they told us, right? Like, there was no more argument. Playtesting can often be a sort of like, when done correctly and with proper demographics, it can be the thing that breaks the ties, right? The thing that settles the arguments, because it is the truest form of feedback about your game.
Good stuff. So let's see, we got some more really great questions here. Let's see. Cube has, was there ever a moment where players' height mattered? For example, when reaching for an item on a VR shelf. So I'll take this first one. Again, with the HoloLab Champions, the team, which I think became a best practice, especially if you play Lost Recipes, which is out on the Quest. I think they were developing mostly on Vive, and Vive had and Ryan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was like a standard height of like 5'9", 5'10". It was something like, you know, a little bit above average, and people were having trouble reaching like their Erlenmeyer flasks and the weights in the HoloLab Champions. And so the team brilliantly was like, well, how about there's a way for you to adjust the shelf as you go within the lab. And so it was a great way to not rely on the height calibration, but through playtesting they saw, because a lot of these were kids that obviously weren't that tall, and so they had to find a way to adjust it in a native format to do that. And so I know some of you might have other recent examples of that.
Yeah, I was thinking of
History Maker too. Oh yeah, no, continue on Lost Recipes.
Yeah, I was thinking of Lost Recipes. So Lost Recipes takes place in kitchens around the world throughout history. And so you can imagine that if you couldn't adjust the counter, right? If the counter is higher than your eyes and you're trying to mix ingredients and grab bowls, like it's just not going to work. So we did use something where you're essentially grabbing onto the counter and you can move it down or up to the height that works. And that's actually something that we play tested that game with a man in a wheelchair, and he was just like really excited, way more than I was expecting, about the ability to do that, because it made such a big difference for him. So that was a cool win.
I've also got an example from something recent, actually from Among Us. It was from one of the playtests. Is that somebody? So you can like recenter your quest boundaries by pressing a Oculus button. But somebody had started seated, and then they stood up in the middle of the playtest, and so they were the imposter, and they could hop in and out of the vents like you can in the flat game. And because they had stood up, they were like kind of poking out of the ceiling of the game. And they're like, oh, it's so weird, but they thought that was like a feature and that they had to bend down to see. They thought it was like part of the thing. And it was really silly.
Super
We didn't
sus.
explain it or anything. Yeah, they were like, oh, it's like I've got to be really, they've got to be like really, I don't know what the word would be, but they had to crouch down. They had to be incognito. I don't know. But that was
so immersed that they couldn't actually expose themselves.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy being an imposter. Yeah. I remember the early days, like I Expect You to Die 1, we're constantly like, well, what height is a player's head versus this? And let's try to set it. I think our approach, as has been described by Alexis and Fiona, is really changed over time, right? Like early VR development, it was all about how can we predict this? And now it's more about how can the player set it themselves? How can we make everyone comfortable? Again, on the topic of accessibility, right? We aren't the experts at what height you want to play at. You are, right? Do you want to play laying down? Do you have a child who's about to play and then you need to do something for them and then you're going to give it back to the child? Like these are the kind of things you learn in playtesting, especially when you cast a wide net. You test with people in their own home with their own device. There's, our our development lessons multiply every time we playtest another title. And another one that comes to mind is History Maker VR. That had kind of a different answer to the height question, because in that case, we wanted to, when you were Abe Lincoln performing on stage, we wanted to make you feel like Abe Lincoln. So regardless of your real world height, we made you tall. Ben Franklin was shorter. That's a really fun one too, with a different answer to a frequent question, which is like, what do you do about the player's height? So
Yeah, very cool. So speaking of just the players overall, there was a question. I think it was Cube again. What's the hardest thing about playtest member management? E.g., getting all participants, well, either all participants working together or all participants working within the playtest environment. So whenever we talk about the playtest environment, I kind of think about structuring the playtest. And Ryan, I'd like to go to you. The philosophy of Schell games when bringing in playtesters, and I'm sure it's expanded to remote, of taking care of the guest. And so, what exactly did that mean, and how has that maybe evolved? And we could toss that to Fiona and Alexis.
yeah, sure. In terms of its evolution, I remember playtests, several years ago. Sometimes we would conduct group playtests, right? We have many people play an app or a game at the same time. We developed for tablets a lot before our sort of present VR era as a studio. And we would have multiple kids or playtesters playing at the same time. So sometimes you would question them in a group setting as well. And a group setting playtest can sometimes elicit different and more interesting feedback. But sometimes, as it's alluded to by this question, it can make it more difficult, right? Someone may dominate the feedback space, or people may be like more hesitant to give feedback that's counter to another person. So all the interesting social dynamics of human beings are at play in a playtest, especially when someone is not testing all by themselves. So in the past, you try to watch out for that if you're proctoring things live. Or you make a decision to do group testing and solo testing to try to eliminate that variable as part of your playtest. But I think, as has been mentioned earlier, even just a solo playtest with one person conducting it, there's an interesting set of social sort of, I don't know, peculiarities that go on there. And you want to make sure the person understands what you're looking for, what they don't need to feel like they need to do. You put them at as much ease as possible, so that's a free line of communication and feedback. So it can get tricky, but I think there's always a solution. And sometimes the solution is more testing.
Good stuff. So what are, let's see, actually, I want to kind of pivot here to interacting with the players. We've been talking about the structuring for a little bit. Well, before we move on, I want to get to Resolve VR's comment about effective play testing. And yeah, here it says how effective is play testing to y'all? Like, is the feedback limited, expansive? Does it help only slightly or a lot? And does it help more with QA? Because I had a question about the difference between play testing and QA, so we could kind of touch on that as well. But yeah, just I'd like to open it up to everybody. How expansive or feedback or expansive or limited feedback could be, and I think Ryan, you touched on it about in person versus remote, the type of questions, or group versus solo. I think everybody could have some very interesting tidbits on this. So please, whoever would like to start.
I can start. I would say it helps a lot. I think the quality of the feedback can certainly vary. And if someone has play tested before, oftentimes the quality of the feedback is better because they are just more trained to think out loud, to be more honest in their answers. I think, like what I'm saying, low quality feedback is more so meaning if someone's afraid to say very much, right? They play the game, but they're just sort of quiet the whole time. That can be not as useful. But to the QA point, I think it's an interesting question. In my mind, QA is looking for things that are broken. And playtesting, like, there could be 10 different ways that a puzzle is designed or that a level is designed. And so there's not like a broken way, there's just a better way. And so we're looking for feedback so that we can pick the better way that works for more people. That's, not too challenging, but not too easy. So I think, we have a fantastic QA team, but what they're really looking for when it gets to QA is about like what's broken, like what's preventing you from moving on to do the next part of the level that wasn't designed that way, right? Playtesting is about like, how are things designed and how can we change those designs so that it's a better experience?
Yeah, just to I wanted to add on to that because I like to think that like some playtesting is always better than no playtesting at all. And I think something that Alexis mentioned earlier in the discussion is that there's always a surprise when you're playtesting. Like, you can learn a ton, even if somebody's not the most experienced playtester and like they're not talking out loud and they're not really saying much. You can learn a ton just from watching somebody play. Even things because on your end, like, how the game is supposed to work. So just seeing somebody do something in the game, and even if they don't realize that it's not what was intended, like that can bring a lot of really good it can just bring up a lot of good questions and also just like new directions to bring things in. So I think that's helpful as well.
Yeah, I from the development side, it is incredibly important. Like we say, like you don't know a decision is a good one in your game until someone plays it and either doesn't mention anything, which sometimes that's all you can hope for, right? Oh, nobody mentioned that UI was bad or weird. That's good. It's not supposed to elicit a lot of feedback, right? Or if something that is supposed to excite the player, they get really excited about. And until that time, you really don't know, or you shouldn't act like right? You shouldn't act like, oh man, these levels, this is the best level. I expect you to die. Like, honestly, feedback that we were seeking, that we were hopefully reaching, especially with the second game, which I was part of the playtesting for, was I want every level to be someone's favorite level, right? Like, we're not trying to like huddle people around certain aspects of the game. You're not trying to get certain responses from people. You have to listen to them and continue to make changes, right? Like, and playtesting sets that course, especially for later stages of development, which are generally polished stages, right? Here's a built game. Here's a coherent full game that you are deciding now with your rapidly diminishing resources, time and people, what to keep working on, what to finish, what to polish. And never is there more a key time for playtesting in the development process than that time. So one thing Alexis pointed out too that I love to mention is like whole features, whole cool ideas, especially in the I Expect You to Die franchise, have come from playtesting results, right? Like, why can't I just do this? Like, why can't you just do that? We're about to, I think next week you'll be able to do that. We're going to get that in. So, I mean, I don't think there's a better example about how important playtesting can be than that, right? Like, it is, playtesters are game developers on your team, truly, in the amount of value that they can bring to the end product.
And one thing we haven't talked about so far, but that I think people might be interested in, is when we talk about playtesting for a game, like we're doing tests just about every other week for months, if not a year, in the development cycle. And that's pretty impressive, I think. and I think it's something that we should be proud of. And we've increased the number of people we've been able to play test with. So like for I Expect You to Die 2, we play tested with almost 100 unique people over the course of that development. And some people were very early on in the process, when we were still figuring things out, and other things were, we had people play test like really close to being done where we couldn't change too much. And so yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and Fiona, you've been doing a lot of the playtest coordination, at least in person within the studio. One thing I'd like to ask you is, with some of your within your months of joining the studio and running a lot of the playtests here, what have been some of your favorite playtest questions to ask?
That's a good question. I think probably my favorite question to ask people is just right at the beginning after they've played something is like, what's one word that you would use to describe this experience? Just because you get like that really initial, because you're not trying to push them in one direction versus the other. Because we ask other questions that's like, what was your favorite thing? What was your least favorite thing? So trying to get at both positive and negative. But I like that question because you get like such a variety of responses for what. Like, how do you feel about that experience? Because sometimes people will say like, oh, it was fantastic, I loved it. And other times people are like, oh, it was so frustrated. So you get kind of like, what's the gut like initial reaction to something? And that could be really telling about also just like, what are the rest of their answers going to be like? It kind of colors like those later responses and gives you a sense of how is this person feeling when they were giving the feedback to us also. So yeah, it can be a good tool. So I do like asking that question to people for the most part.
Good I think stuff. That's my favorite one too.
Yeah, hey, on the marketing team, that helps us as well, right? So
yeah, what's that emotion? And it is amazing how you might ask 10 other questions where you feel like, oh, they had a pretty good time, based on their answers. But then you ask that question and they're like, what's that one word? And they're like, frustrated. And you're like, what? So it can be very telling.
Yeah, so I know you might be about to jump in, Ryan, but I do want to jump in here, and you might be interested in this as well. That, to your point, Alexis, like I know we love to hear the good things, but there's sometimes that either the product team or the project team listens a little bit more to the negative things, and so I wonder how does our teams make that balance in terms of the negative feedback versus the positive? Like if 100 people just love this thing, but 6 people just really hated it, like how do we make sure that our teams don't focus on that 6? Like, man, I really wish out of the 106, 6 hated it. How can we make those 6 people love that game, right? Because they're
Yeah.
because we, as a creative industry, we want to make sure that we have as many people like it as possible, right? So
Yep.
there's that give and take. So how do we combat that, or how do we mitigate that?
Yeah, it's not easy, I'll tell you that. And that example you gave, like, my first thought is there could be something to learn for those 6 people, right? Did they get stuck in a specific spot that if you do a very specific thing and I expect you to die level, for example, it could result in a bad game state, like even a bug, or so you definitely can't ignore it. It's never that simple, but you definitely have to let the praise in too. And that's actually something we haven't mentioned yet, which is playtesting can be an awesome vector for positive feedback about something that you're still working on, right? You don't have to wait until the game hits the shelves and the reviews come in to know if anyone actually likes this thing. You can get that awesome loop throughout development. Like, oh man, what we're making is great. Like, sometimes I just have to remind myself of that because I'm just sitting here in front of the computer, like, hoping. But yeah, in terms of critical feedback, something that I found is that sometimes a developer's harshest playtester is always going to be themselves, right? So if you do a good enough job of insulating yourself from being too reactive to good and bad feedback, it's often yourself that you're trying to please. And I see Until You Fall has gotten a lot of mentions in the comments. Like, that team was their own biggest critic, right? Like, sometimes no amount of positive feedback, like, this is incredible, I've never played anything like this in VR. Like, yeah, but it's not balanced yet. We really need the sword and the dagger is too strong, So that happens as well. But yeah, I mean, you definitely need a thick skin, and you need a thick skin, like you point out, against the good and the bad. You don't just want to coast on good feedback either, right? That's the other mistake you can make, is like, well, people like it, so I guess we're done.
I think one thing that's been cool with the I Expect You to Die games is that sometimes we can give people options. So things like alternate solves, where you might be able to change some negative feedback or negative experience by basically giving players choice. Now, obviously, we can't always do that, but sometimes we can. And I think the other thing, like, I'm a very quantitative focused person whenever we get negative feedback, because my sort of general rule of thumb is, like, if it's just one person out of 5 players, then, like, we probably don't need to act on it. If it's 3 out of 5 players, then, like, we probably should act on it. And if it's 2 out of 5, then it's a little bit more up for debate. So, I mean, those are just rough numbers, but it is definitely, like, we can't make everything perfect for everyone. We want to have as many happy players as possible. So we do our best.
I think also something else that can help with that too is having multiple people look at the data that comes in. Because if it's just one person who's like framing the information to give to other people, that can also, bias. Like, because if you're focusing on one thing, like, maybe you just don't even realize it. Like, there was something else in there, and then somebody else pulls it out, and it's like, oh, great. And then you can kind of like, you can I don't know, I completely lost my thought there, but you can frame it a little bit better, just knowing that, like, other people are seeing different things, and it's good to have multiple eyes on something before making a decision. So
Yeah, I agree.
Good stuff. Oh man, we have so many questions, and let's see. Really quickly, Resolve has a great question here. How important is it for Schell games to have repeat play testers? Alexis, if you want to try to tackle that one.
Sure. I would say that most of the time we do not have repeat playtesters for a particular game, because we tend to learn the most from people that are brand new to the game. So if you've playtested, let's say in March, and we're continuing to playtest, like, we probably won't have you play that same game again. But when we have people that are really good at giving us feedback, Like I've definitely said to other teams, like, oh, Ryan, like you should, make sure to include this person in the playtest because they provided really great feedback to us. One thing we have done, though, that's a little bit different than the question, but for I Expect You to Die, it was important to us to make sure that we have playtesters who were both brand new to the franchise and players who were big fans and had experience with it, because we know that's the real world, right? We're going to get people that have played I Expect You to Die before. They kind of get the general idea of the puzzles, and then people that are brand new to it. So there is some value in playtesting with people that have certain knowledge. But generally speaking, we don't have a lot of people that will playtest the same game more than once. Not never, but.
Yeah, I was reminded of I Expect You to Die too as well. You could almost call that like a compound playtest where we ran a lot of people through the game's tutorial and then would tap those folks again to test later levels. So it was more like how we were organizing it than like strictly repeat playtesters. But the other thing is a game with a very high difficulty curve. If the game gets very challenging, to test that sort of upper limit of function, like, oh man, if a hardcore gamer has been playing this for months, how do they respond to the game? It's possible you could work with the same tester over a longer period of time so that they can reach that level of familiarity.
Cool. All right, let's see. Oh man, so let's go with one more, and then we'll talk just a little bit about evaluating the playtest, because I do think that's important. See, Resolve VR says, what's the most gut-wrenching thing you had to change based on negative feedback that you at Schell Games thought was really good or worked really well and didn't want to change? So has that happened to you? You don't have to get in too much detail. And for Alexis, Fiona, who haven't been here that long, you can kind of expound on your previous experiences. Doesn't have to be something Schell Games specific.
I got to think about this.
So if anybody else has an answer. I mean, for me, I thought, I knew Until You Fall had to come out with some difficulty options. That was always on the roadmap, right? It was always on the roadmap to have difficulty settings, but there was just something about it just being like just that whole roguelite of like, this is it, like kind of get better, right? so like the sportsman in me is like, yeah, I mean, if you want, easy, medium, hard, like there's other games for that. But if there's a games for easy, games for medium, and games for hard, and this one was something between medium and hard, and so I understood that there needed to be some balance, but that was me. I think it did work out really well. It worked out really well despite my self biases, and so I put business Dwayne ahead of personal Dwayne.
I can think of a sort of a cheating example, but when we first made I Expect You to Die, there was definitely no assurance in our mind that we'd make a sequel. So there were a lot of really cool level concepts that sort of fell by the wayside, or we did some early testing, playtesting, relevant, to determine how sick certain situations would make people, right? It's a seated experience, but when you're simulating other kinds of motion, but there isn't real motion, for example, the train level was one that came out as DLC eventually, but it was something that we tested early on and couldn't quite strike a balance with. And a lot of people were like, oh, but the coolest scenes in all the movies that we're like sort of evoking, like have a cool train scene. We got to figure this out. So I think we kind of like really got good at it when we went for the private jet in the sequel. So that's the nice thing about eventually, we didn't know at the time, but having a franchise is your great ideas that you missed the opportunity to make could still sort of come back once you get your ducks in a row.
Yeah, that's a good example.
I don't know. I mean, I don't feel too heartbroken. Again, like they call it, they say kill your darlings, right? Like getting very used to taking these great ideas. Like, so it's probably the defense mechanism. I've just blocked some of this out of my head. Once something's gone, it's gone, you know?
Yeah, actually, I think for I Expect You to Die 2, we had, in the earlier version of it, there was a lot more complicated story. And it was a good story. Like, it was more complex. It was interesting. But when we play tested, we did full game play tests where we were asking people, to describe the story and ask them specific questions to test their comprehension. And it was really obvious that like nobody was really picking up on all these subtle parts of the story. And it was having the opposite effect of like confusing people. So like they're like, wait, am I the bad guy or is that person the bad guy? Like, and like what's the motive of this character? And we're like, oh whoa, like that's not good. And so we did cut things and we simplified the story, and like it was pretty good, I would say. As the developers, like we got it right because we were living it every day. But I think in the end, like that was the right thing to do, because when we simplified it, players had a better understanding, they had a better experience, there wasn't that confusion. So it was the right thing to do.
I'll see, Alexis. Now we have to put on a board some type of director's cut of I Expect You Die too. So
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll wrap up. There's a lot of questions, but we'll try to answer these in some other format. But I do want to get to our final question and then a bunch of stuff that we are excited to announce. But so Fiona, what continues to excite you about playtesting?
I think just that it's always something different. You're typically not testing the same thing more than once, or if you are, there's like been minor changes. Like rapid iterative design is something that I find really interesting, and so just getting to see the way that something changes over the course of its development, I think, is really nice. And also just getting to work on a lot of different things. You get to work on a lot of different projects, talk to a lot of different people. So yeah, it's always something different and exciting, and it's new. So that's what I think excites me most and what I enjoy about playtesting.
Cool. Alexis?
I really just love the excitement that players have about our games. We often do interviews with people just like this, through Google Meet, where we get to talk to them after they've played, and it's a really good feeling to hear that positive excitement and energy, and people that are sort of cheering you on before your product is live and out there in the world. It's pretty cool.
And Ryan.
Yeah, I really like hearing when people have ideas for the game that they just played a slice of. To me, first of all, that's a great sign because it means they're invested. Like their mind is already twirling and still in the game, even like Alexis mentioned in an interview, in a post interview. And yeah, like design is a highly collaborative endeavor, at least in my opinion. And the best ideas don't come from a single source. So playtesting is also another great place where you can challenge your assumptions about your own product and grow it in really interesting and unexpected ways. And that's always like my favorite part.
Good stuff. So thank you guys. So just to follow up on a couple of questions I could try to quickly answer here. Seagull asked, why do you choose to recreate Among Us in VR rather than creating a new game, or what made you choose in making Among Us VR? So Among Us VR is a completely different game, right? So while Intersoft created the flat game of Among Us, we are working with Innersloth and Robot Teddy to create, or the VR consultant, to create Among Us VR. So it's a different IP based off of Among Us, and while there might be some different or some things that are very similar, it is totally in VR and it's built as a VR game. So I want to make sure we differentiate that those who are playing the flat game of Among Us, you'll be just as excited as you are in VR, and it's in VR and it's super cool and it's super amazing. And you can sign up for that beta test that Adam can throw in the chat to be picked. Well, it's not guaranteed that you'll be picked to be in the beta test, but you can apply to be in the field. But it is a different feel of the game, so keep that in mind. And then Phase JRB wants my opinion of the Mario movie that's going to feature Chris Pratt. I'm sure it'll be interesting. So I guess there's that. So thank you all. We have some additional announcements here. First off, if you're in the game industry, want to get into the game industry, you're looking for a new path in your career, we are hiring. We're hiring not just a product manager to be on Alexis' team and Fiona's team. We're also hiring a product marketing manager that will be on the marketing team, so working alongside me. We have a number of designer positions that would be working with the design team along Ryan, and plenty of engineering positions as well. So please, schellgames.com, our new website, it's up and running starting today. Schellgames.com/careers, and you can see all of that information there. Future events for our friends in Europe. I'm going to be at Gamescom. Me and the producer for Among Us VR, Jennifer, we are going to be at Gamescom giving out some Among Us VR pins. If you take a picture with the Among Us VR cutout at our booth in Cologne, Germany, at the Cologne Mess, so that'll be really fun. And if you can't make it to Cologne, our team at PAX West is going to be doing the same thing. So Adam, our live chat moderator, who's our senior community marketing specialist, he'll be there along with our marketing specialist, Danielle, giving out pins as part of PinQuest. So that is super exciting. It's our first time being a part of PinQuest for PAX, and we're giving out these awesome Among Us VR pins. So if you haven't decided to go to PAX West, and now you hear this information, I encourage you to do so. For some game announcements, yes, sign up for the beta test for Among Us VR if you are interested. Like playtesting, you get a chance to see the game, play the game, and give the team feedback, see how the servers work for us. So that'd be fantastic. Please do that. And also, if you're interested in future updates about the games, check out all of our social media and our newsletters as well. So next month, we are in a regular schedule, September 28th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S., building a game portfolio. What exactly do hiring managers look at whenever you are building a game portfolio? What questions will be asked during your initial interviews or your tests as a engineer, designer, all those good things. And if you just have to just make games to build our portfolio, what exactly does that look like? What exactly are the tools to use? We're going to have hiring managers and folks from the HR team to be able to answer those questions for you. So Alexis, Fiona, Ryan, thank you guys so much for joining me for our August dinner with the devs. For those who joined live, thank you for joining us and asking those awesome questions. And for those who watch it later, thank you for tuning in. And I hope you watch the rest of our streams as well. We are signing off. The rest of you, please stay on whenever I end the stream. Adam, thank you for your work. Marketing team, Allie will be our post-production, sending all the chapters and all the fun questions and little tidbits of information from here. And Jill, our senior marketing director, who allows us to keep doing this every month. So thank you all. We appreciate your support, and we will see you later.